Okay, the last thing I want to do here is look at different habitat types in Colorado. So the Colorado Wildlife State Action Plan has designated these as habitats here in Colorado. So forest, and then it goes by dominant vegetation type: aspen, lodgepole, mixed conifer, pinyon juniper, ponderosa pine, spruce fir, subalpine limber, and bristlecone in the subalpine areas. Grasslands, we don't necessarily, to my knowledge, have any tall grass prairies. We might have I don't know of any. I guess it's on here, but we do have a lot of mixed grass prairies, and we have a lot of short grass prairies up here in northern Colorado. Um, Shrublands: desert shrub, greasewood, oak and mixed mountain shrublands, sagebrush, saltbush, sand sage, upland shrub. That all just goes again on what kind of shrublands are most dominant. And then we have a lot of aquatic, so the playas, the riparian woodlands, wetlands, um, and Colorado Plateau, Wyoming basins, etc. You can see all those here. So there's a lot of different habitat types in Colorado, and various threats that are going to affect some of these habitats. And that's what I want to end here with, is looking at those threats. So before we do that, this is a quick map of where those different habitat types are. You can see right here along the Front Range, we're in the ponderosa pine, and the white then would be urban, hence that giant chunk of white right here. And then here we go, shortgrass prairie, what we're going to have up north here. Playas are just little seasonal wetlands, kind of on the basis of rain events. So that's why you have such a dotted red, all these little dots here. It's not going to stay wet very long. The green here is going to be your riparian corridors, I imagine. Probably, I'm not seeing that green, but that's right along the South Platte River, so I'm pretty sure that's what that would be. Okay, so here's our threats. What I would like you to do is take a moment before we get started and see if you can come up with 4 to 5 different threats that you might foresee being a problem for various habitat types in Colorado. So what might degrade habitat or reduce habitat here in Colorado? Come up with 3 or 4 threats. See what you can come up with. Okay, so hopefully you came up with a few as we go through this. See if you can compare your thoughts to what Colorado Parks and Wildlife has identified as threats. The first one you probably came up with is development, residential and commercial development. This can be things from like housing in urban areas, industrial and commercial. So that might be manufacturing plants or power plants, train yards, airports, all of that would go in there. Tourism and recreational areas. So that would be even things like ski areas, golf courses, county parks, campgrounds, stuff like that. Another threat to habitats might be incompatible agriculture, and by incompatible we mean incompatible with wildlife. So this would be annual and perennial non-timber crops. It's probably what you think of with crops. That would be anything from like corn and hay and things like that to more intensive agricultural operations, maybe feedlots, vineyards, plantations, things like that. Wood and pulp plantations, we don't think about that too much. That might just be where we've planted trees in areas that are outside of natural forests. Maybe it's just a Christmas tree farm or something like that. Then we get the livestock farming and ranching. This could be anything from like cattle raised on site in your own pastures to free ranging cattle in the forest. It could be feedlots, it could be chicken farms, it could be sheep farms. A lot going on with livestock farming and ranching. Then one that we wouldn't have a whole lot of is marine aquaculture, but we do have a fair amount of freshwater aquaculture, not just in government agencies too, but you can have privately owned aquaculture setups, whether it be hatcheries or holding ponds, things like that. Okay, next threat. Energy production and mining. This is a big one for Colorado. We get a lot of oil and gas drilling, obviously. Our northeastern plains is a wonderful spot for finding oil and gas, and so is the northwest part of Colorado. Mining and quarrying. Well, a lot of the ponds right here in Fort Collins are a result of gravel mining and pulling rocks out of the ground, replacing it maybe with a different habitat when you're done, but you definitely have changed habitat. Renewable energy. Oh, you think that that's always the answer, right? But it's going to have its effects too, whether that be solar farms that take up a lot of space and may become barriers for wildlife movement, or even wind farms. We have a lot of problems with birds flying into windmills, so that can be a big deal too. So we tend to think that oil and gas bad, renewable energy good, but truth be told, they both have their problems. Now I want to show you this map. This is just straight off of Google satellite imagery, but I love the contrast that you see here. This is out by Kersey, Colorado. This is the South Platte River coming down through this part of the picture. And you can see here that we have our center pivot irrigation. When you see those circles, that means that it's irrigated. And you have a center pivot is a very efficient way to irrigate farmlands. However, it definitely changes habitat. Then when we go east, what do you suppose all of this is? No longer do we have agriculture, no longer do we have center pivots because we have a whole lot of oil and gas development. So you can see these well pads are some of them are really large, but just look at all of the roads and all of the ways that this habitat has been bisected. And I just took one little small snapshot. If you get on Google Maps and just look at the eastern plains of Colorado, this is a pretty typical view, and that obviously is going to have its impacts on wildlife. Okay, speeding things up. Transportation and service corridors, that's kind of a no-brainer. Roads and railroads. Utility service and power lines, that's can be a problem. Even flight paths for things that like birds, that'll impact birds and where they can be. Then we have biological resource use. This could be trying to control nuisance species or collecting species, killing or trapping wild animals for commercial recreation, subsistence research, or cultural purposes. We can have gathering terrestrial plants for a variety of reasons. Logging and wood harvesting, that can degrade or diminish habitat. That could be any kind of silvicultural practice, whether it be clear cutting or thinning, fragmentation, changing what was there. And then fishing or harvesting of aquatic species. That might be a threat to our wildlife as well. Maybe not so much a threat to the habitat as a threat to the wildlife itself. Recreational activities can interfere with wild animals' use of their habitats, and that can just be like people spending time in nature and therefore stressing those animals. Or it could be maybe noise pollution from snowmobiles or mountain bikers racing through a habitat. Hikers, skiers, campers can have their impact on wildlife. This one seems silly. War, civil unrest, or military excursions, but this can just be habitat loss or impacts on wildlife due to training operations from the military and on our military bases. Something to know that a lot of our military organizations have wildlife biologists on site that actually manage that are the land managers for those bases. So that might be a career path to think of, especially for those of you who have military experience. We could also have just people, this work or other activities is like proximal non-recreation disturbance. And what that is, it might just be law enforcement going through the woods, looking for illegal activities. It could be just people moving through the natural environments for one reason or another. And then we have natural system modifications. This could be things like fire and fire suppression, dams and water use. Dams is a huge deal to our aquatic species. and how we're using water, when we're using, and how that changes flows in rivers. That's a big deal. Or any other kind of ecosystem modification that might then change what's available for habitat. And when we do that, oftentimes it's for some type of way of improving human welfare. Maybe it's to keep rivers within their banks and not have them change course. Maybe it's simply mowing grass or thinning trees, putting in any kind of man-made system like beaches along our ponds and things like that. Invasive or other problematic species and genes. We haven't spent too much time talking about invasives, but they can be a really big deal. So when you have an invasive species come in that outcompete natives, you generally have a reduction in biodiversity. And most commonly, your invasive species are generalist, and they will outcompete your specialist. You get problematic native species as well, though. Think about our mountain pine beetle that's native to Colorado and how much it has impacted habitat. You can think of elk up in Rocky Mountain National Park, and how much they have impacted habitat in the riparian systems up there. You can get situations where we've introduced genetic material into a population, like we discussed with the sage grouse, like what has occurred with greenback cutthroat trout would be another example. Or diseases and pathogens that might come in and harm wildlife and change the population. And again, like that one wouldn't be so much a threat to the habitat as it would be a threat to the animals themselves. Pollution. Oh, the pollution. Household sewage and urban wastewater. We throw so much down our drains, and one thing we often don't think about is that the storm drains that go from our streets feed directly into the rivers. So whatever we're putting down those storm drains is affecting our aquatic communities. Industrial and military effluents. Effluents might be a new word. That is simply water discharging from something. So industrial areas are known for their point source pollution of effluents that enter into our water. However, with the Clean Water Act passing in the 60s, the amount of pollutants has gone down tremendously from these kind of point source pollutions. Agriculture and forestry effluents. Now, these are much harder to control. This might be having a surplus of nutrients that are washing off of our agricultural landscapes and into our water systems, like nitrogen and phosphorus, when we fertilize in either forested areas or agriculture, or it could be siltation from activities that we're doing in our forest. Siltation is just adding soil to the water. Garbage and solid waste, of course, that's pollution. Airborne pollutants, we don't think about this one quite as much, but our nitrogen gas that we add back up into our atmosphere, nitrates and ammoniums and all of that fun stuff that can then combine with hydrogen ions and become acid rain. And excess energy, this is another one that is a little bit, I don't know, not so intuitive, but the excess energy might just simply be things like noise pollution. It might be things like heated water from power plants that then change the temperature of the water in the streams. It could be light pollution from our cities at night. All of these things can impact our wildlife. And geologic events, avalanches and mudslides would be the ones that would happen in Colorado that might change habitat. In other places, it might be earthquakes and hurricanes, but that wouldn't happen here in Colorado. Climate change and severe weather. This is a big one coming our way. Habitat shifting. We might start to get communities shifting to becoming more dry land species along our Front Range. Droughts, temperature extremes, storms and floodings, these events all being the result of climate change and having these severe weather events. Okay, that wraps up our lesson on habitat. You have a few chapters in your book to take a look at, and then the assignment will be posted to D2L. Good luck!